if you're anything like me, you have noticed the push to sexualize our children, especially in the Western cultures, especially in America. And this agenda is growing, and it's just a continuation of the over-sexualization of our entire culture. Now, this doesn't mean that sex is bad or dirty or we should be prudes, and yet we should have a line and know what's appropriate in how to deal with children. And we should be very wary of the over-sexualization of our children. And yet it seems like it's happening elsewhere. It seems like it's happening in other places or on the news or in the media. But in reality, we are the front lines. We who are parents, youth pastors, trusted adults in the world of children, we are the front lines of standing up for what is appropriate and having healthy conversations about sex and around sex with our kids because they have been exposed to it. And so today I have with me again Barb Winters. She is a return guest, and she has a new book out called Sexpectations, about healthy conversations and healthy relationships involving these things. So really want you to check out this episode. And as usual, go into the description and check out the link for the free ebook and download that book, and that'll be great. And also there will be a link for my new book that's just come out. We Were Reborn for This: How to Live Jesus and Heaven on Earth, the Jesus model for living heaven on earth. So check that out as well. Get a copy of that on Amazon. And remember to subscribe, like, follow, all of those things for this podcast. You can get some more great content. All right. So let's get to the interview. All right, well, welcome back to Kingdom Over Coffee. And today we have an amazing guest. She is a return guest. So, Barb, say hello to everybody.
Hello to everybody. Thank you, Bert. I appreciate you having me here today.
Of course. And it's been a while. I think last year you were on talking about some things that were on your heart. And we'll get to that in a second. But, you know, Barb Winters is an author, and she is a speaker and all those sort of fun things that authors have to do these days. And she just put out a book. She just had a launch party, and she has launch party hangover or something today. I'm not saying anything untoward happened at the party. I'm just saying she had a great time. Was it a great time?
Absolutely. So much love, fun, very receptive. Celebration, man. Yeah, it's exciting.
You know, and this is kind of an aside, but I don't think that we celebrate enough in the church.
True story.
I don't know. I mean, I know we should, hopefully, in your church, you're singing praises to God and you're celebrating Him. And that is obviously the core of everything. However, I think in our churches, part of being a family and a community should be celebrating one another and the things that are just happening. You know, it doesn't have to be a church event. It can just be celebrating someone, you know, who, like you said, launched a book or did whatever. So I don't know.
Well, I think we're taught like to be humble, right? Like,
right.
And humble means you don't like put yourself forward, et cetera. So I'm actually learning to celebrate great things in my life because, you know, God's in it. So let's hoop and holler and be excited about things that happen, whether it's small stuff or big stuff. Yeah, let's do it.
Well, and I think that's the key is you can push your podcast, for instance, or you can push a book, or you can push something out of a selfish motivation. You want to make money, or you want to have fame, or there can be selfish motivations. But you can do the very same thing and yet really have a heart to celebrate the fact that God has a message for people that will bless them, or, you know, it's all about the motivation. And I think that comes across with people. I think people get that and hopefully see that you're trying to just be a blessing and you're trying to celebrate that God is at the center of your story. And yeah, we should, and part of it is that we should just part of it is I don't think that we look for ways to celebrate. We don't keep our eyes open for ways to celebrate, especially as pastors. I think so much of our time is taken up with the problems that people are having. I'm not saying we should dismiss their problems. I'm just saying, like, I think we get overwhelmed by that as pastors oftentimes and don't make sure that we take the time to also celebrate and share with people all the amazing things that are just happening. And,
Right.
Because a lot of the problems we don't get up on church, we don't get up on Sunday and be like, let me tell you about this person's problems, but we can do that with celebration, right? Let me tell you about, this person got a new job. Isn't that great? They worked really hard. And, it takes just a little bit, but I think it kind of builds community. So I don't know, just a little side, little soapbox for me.
Great.
So Barb, just tell everybody just a little bit about yourself. They may not have listened to the previous episode. So just tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. I'm a pastor's wife and I'm a retired homeschool mom, which just basically means all my kids are old, which I think makes me old. And so I'm an author and a speaker. I work part-time for a nonprofit called E3 Family Solutions. And we go into schools. We talk about making healthy choices, avoiding risky behaviors. And I became a part of that organization because we had a child who was addicted to pornography. And he's now recovered, praise the Lord. But that started my journey of writing about the dangers of pornography, about reaching out to parents and moms especially, and just trying to give virtual hugs, because this is not a conversation that we've typically had in the past. So when it was happening to us as a family, I began to do some research. I learned about the dangers of pornography, how pervasive it is. And we did talk a lot about that on our first, in our first discussion.
Yeah.
I've learned about, middle schoolers sending and receiving nudes, how early that starts. I learned about hookup culture, grooming for human trafficking, all these things that our children are encountering. And I was like, why aren't we having these discussions? So I started Hopeful Mom, which is now 5 years old. I'm so excited. We're also celebrating that.
Celebrate.
Yeah, celebrate. And so we, through that process, God said, it's time to write a book. And I was like, what? But it was. And so I started writing, and it's for parents, it's for caregivers, it's for grandparents, it's for leaders in the church, it's for teachers, it's for people who work with preteens, teens, and young adults. Like, what world are they in, and how can we come alongside them and help them understand healthy relationships?
Amen. Yeah. So yeah, we totally had a big conversation about that. And I think we said it at the time, but part of the reason why we don't talk about it is that secrets have power in darkness. And so the enemy wants us to keep certain conversations. And I don't think, as another part of this, and I don't think that Christians, especially in a more conservative, evangelical context, know how to have conversations about sex without it feeling like they're doing something wrong.
Right. Correct.
And you can, right, have these conversations about sex and cross a line and be too graphic or make things awkward. I mean, that can happen. I think maybe on the more, this is gross generalization, but I think maybe on the more kind of sort of liberal side of some of Christianity, they might not see it as a big deal. Some of the things we might be talking about, but for people who do see it as a big deal, I think that it's also difficult for them to know how to have these conversations. So here's my question. I'm going to start the conversation here. Okay. I have been praying against and noticing and speaking against, just in a general way, as I've noticed how sexualized our culture has become, and that without being too triggering or doomsday about it, that there is a reality that there are certain agendas in our modern Western culture, especially in America, that are trying to sexualize children younger and younger and younger. Like that is actually happening. There are books that are trying to be put in, and of course the resistance is always, well, you're banning books to not give a book about sex to a kindergartner. It's like, well, no, we're not banning books. We're just like, I'm not banning a book to say, I don't know that we should talk about the Holocaust with a kindergartner either. Like
we're protecting our kids. That's what we're
protecting our kids. And we're saying this isn't appropriate for this age group.
Right.
And I feel like it's accelerating, and I could be wrong. Maybe I'm just old, but it feels to some degree, I think it's true that it seems to have been purposefully accelerated in the past 2 to 3 years, like this sexualization of our children, kindergarten, elementary school. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but that's where that was what came to mind as I was like, what should we talk about today? Because I think that's kind of at the core of what a lot of these issues are, is that we're over sexualizing our culture.
Well, and as parents, it's our job to put it back in its proper place. And I think as Christians, don't know how to do that, like you said, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And our kids are running across this stuff, and they don't know. They don't understand that what they see, like the pornography industry, for example, it preys on children because
Absolutely.
they know that if they get a consumer early, that they will have a consumer for life. And so what our parents don't understand is that like our children are being preyed on. And so we need to be more proactive, but we don't know how to be proactive, right? Because we failed so miserably. We've either come out and we look like we're old fashioned, and then people just poo poo us like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. Or we're just silent because, you're not supposed to talk about that stuff. So being able to put it in its proper place and not being afraid of the conversation. So I have conversations with parents who have 4 or 5-year-olds, and they're like, well, I don't know what to say about that. If something comes on the TV and we don't agree, we just shut it off. And I'm trying to help them understand, well, just shutting off is, yes, we're helping them. We're putting it in a bubble, but their friends are all watching this. So how can we, instead of just shutting it off, because yes, it's not that I don't think we should shut it off, but let's also have some sort of conversation about why we're shutting it off, and more open questions too, as opposed to just saying, this is what you should or shouldn't do. So asking questions like, what do you think about that? And what do your friends say about that? And being more involved in the conversation, of course, depending on the age, but allowing them some wiggle room, some margin, if you will, for them to come to their own conclusion, and us not just dictating to them what they have to believe because this is what the Bible says, but allowing them the opportunity to say, well, yeah, that's one view of what people believe, but here's what Dad and I or Mom and I believe, and this is why. And, let's look at this. Let's look at this side of it too. And let's pray about it together and let God really do a work in your life, and allow our kids as they get older to have that room to make some of their own decisions. Which is very scary, very, very scary.
Yeah, it's very scary, and yet at the same time, it's the best way to teach. I was having this conversation. I've been having this conversation recently about storytelling in general, about how, the problem, my problem at least, and I think, that as I've done a lot of study about stories, and even the ministry of Jesus, that sometimes we in Christian media give the answers too readily when we're trying to tell a story, instead of telling a story that gets people to ask questions and dig for themselves. Because, you are a homeschool mom, and, my wife and I have a background in education, and my wife is a high school teacher. And it's not good teaching to just tell somebody something and expect them to regurgitate it back to you. That's actually not that has the least amount of ownership for that person. They have no ownership in that. It doesn't belong to them at all. It's just you rote memorization or something. But when you start off the conversation, give some guidance, ask some questions, and like you're saying, help people to come to their own conclusions of what the truth is based on evidence, based on research, based on their own sort of digging, then, and that we do this as a teacher, right? I mean, you kind of frame it in a way that it's like, okay, here's how you search, here's what you do. And then when they come to the answer, when they find the answer, they own it. Now it's theirs. And people remember that better. And we do, because there is legitimately, and maybe sometimes in a fear way, so much danger in these ideas about sex, and we do see it happening so quickly, maybe that it's accelerated, that it may be just, it may feel easier to just go, oh, that's bad, and just, and kind of react instead of having like a real conversation, because kids are having these conversations elsewhere. Even at church, they're having these conversations elsewhere. Definitely. And so as parents, we need to be, just involved. So what are some more thoughts you have on ways to sort of guide those conversations? I mean, I love what you already said, but I just didn't know if you have any other thoughts about, let's ask these sort of questions and bring up, just kind of how help parents to know, like, how can I do this with my kids?
Sure. Well, I have to say before I answer that question that I wasn't the perfect parent. Some of the advice I give as a old lady is because of the ways that I didn't do it well. Right. So I have a whole chapter in Sexpectations, the book, on communication. And part of what I say is it's not always about the words that we're using, but it's more about the atmosphere that we're creating within our home and how we approach these topics. And so, first of all, not being afraid of the conversation, right? Because whatever it is, whether we're talking about sending nudes or we're talking about gaming or screen time or pornography, whatever it is, not being afraid of using words that we haven't used in the past, because, I thought we didn't talk about sex. We don't use words like masturbation and pornography. And, I was, if I had to refer to these things, I kind of whispered and said inappropriate conduct or something like that. Right. So just first of all, not being afraid of the conversation. Second of all, making it an atmosphere in which it appears as if we are interested in them as a person, right? Validating, valuing them, making sure they understand that there's a place for them in our family. They're loved, they're accepted, they belong there. And this stuff doesn't happen overnight. And it's not all about just the one conversation. It's ongoing conversations, but it's also conversations that have nothing to do with difficult topics, right? So in life, just making them feel like they have value in the family. And then when these conversations come up, they understand, like, whatever you say or do, it's not going to make or break our relationship. Right? You can make mistakes, you can fail, you can do things that are unhealthy, and that doesn't mean that I'm going to stop loving you or that I'm going to stop valuing you as a person. And so then, having open conversation starters, and it depends on the age, really, as far as how to dive into some of these difficult conversations. But if you have a preteen in your world, they're running across this stuff. You're not opening up a can of worms for them. They're already running across it. So asking general questions like, hey, I just learned on this podcast today that you can access pornography through gaming. What do you know about that? Or hey, I learned that middle schoolers send nudes back and forth to each other like it's no big deal. Do you have any information about that? What do your friends say? And just asking those open-ended questions to see where they are, gauge what they know, and follow-up questions, based on how they answer that. And things like, well, what would God say about that? Not again using tones and inflection that is not judgmental. And again, I'm throwing my hands up here because I failed at this so many times. But I also, came around and eventually at some point began having these open discussions with my children and helping them understand, like, I'm on your side. When I talk with you about these conversations, it's because it's my job as a parent to love you, protect you, keep you safe. But I'm also on your side. I want to see you thrive. I want to see you be the best person that you can. And when we're in the classroom, because, we can't talk about Christ or God or Bible or anything like that, but we do tell the kids, look, we're here because we want to see you live an optimal life. So we're on your side and we're here to help you be the best you that you can possibly be now and moving forward. So I hope that answered the question.
No, it absolutely does. And I love how you framed it in a sense of kind of building a culture in your home of conversations, and that should start early. But even if it doesn't, and I love that you pointed this out, even if it doesn't, or you find yourself in a position where your kids are a little older and you haven't done this yet, you can still start now and here and wherever you are and have those conversations, maybe even apologize for times that you didn't listen in the past or something. Just kind of come at it from that sort of framework, because just as someone who, and my kids we've kind of had to adjust some of this in the past few years as they become teenagers. Like, we used to have all kind of really open conversations when they were younger, but then, they get into the teenage years and they start to clam up a little bit. So you got to ask a few more questions. But some of them, my point is you can start and you can adjust as you go. Something that my mom modeled for me, and I don't know, I think God taught her this. I mean, I just don't know where, I don't think she learned it anywhere. But my mother was also an educator, and I was the kind of kid who asked weird questions, not weird, but like just not normal questions, about life and the Bible and sex and whatever was on my brain. I just had, not that I didn't have any filter, but I just didn't, if it was on my mind, I wanted to talk about it. And so my mother shared with me much later about how, yes, that was difficult for her because she was, I think I was born when she was 21, so I'm the oldest. And so she was young and, didn't know what to do with a kid who came home in the first grade and was like, hey, my friend said this is how babies are made. I said, no way, that's not. And so, I said, my parents would never do that. And so, but of course, I went into what they said, and my mother just later on said, whenever you had those sort of questions, I only answered what you were asking. Like, I never, she didn't offer a ton more information. Well, hey, let's just make this, just this overwhelming amount of information that was inappropriate for me at, first grade. But like you're saying, if I was already thinking about it and asking about it, then just running from the conversation wasn't probably going to help me. And we are no one loves our kids more than we do, except for God. And so that brings me to my next point is that what I found is kind of key in this, and that my mom shared with me, because again, she was young and had this kid that she didn't realize that she was going to have, in the sense of all the conversations she was going to have, and she didn't feel prepared for. So she asked God for help. and
Mm.
she asked God for discernment and wisdom about how to engage in these conversations with me. And so, and I have found that as well, because there's so much that comes up, and often even I feel unprepared to talk about it in the moment. And for me, there's a discipline of yes, of engaging in the conversation and not being afraid of it, but also just having that still moment of saying, okay, God, you're going to have to help me here. Tell me how to handle this. Tell me what I should say, because he knows what my kids need to hear
Yeah.
more than I do.
Right.
And so I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think it's okay to tell your child, I can't answer that right now. Like, I
Mm.
love that you asked that question. I love that you're coming to me right now, but I need some time to think about it. And so let's table that conversation, and even, whether you schedule a time right at that moment or you just come back to it, always coming back to it, of course, but taking that time to pause and pray, because we all of a sudden get that sense of urgency. The amygdala starts flying, and we get that fight or flight sort of thing going on, because our kids are asking us weird things, and sometimes even just like listening to a podcast like that, your emotions start freaking out, and you're like, oh my gosh, I got to take care of this now. But we don't. We don't have to take care of it right now. It can wait. So take that pause. That's one advice that I give to parents a lot of times. You don't have to address the situation right now, because if it's a problem, it's been a problem for a while, so it can wait. And if it's not a problem and your child's coming to you and asking you a question, just saying, that's a great question. I don't quite know yet, and I'm not sure how much information to give you, so let me pause, let me pray about it, and we'll come back to you. That's awesome advice.
Yeah. And I wanted to bring something up. You kind of mentioned it earlier, as far as why we don't have some of these conversations, and it's something that I've had to deal with. Just as an example, well, of course, as a pastor, you're expected to do certain things, but my kids, my daughters, we were having dinner the other night. My daughters, who are 13 and 15, the youngest brought up this idea of marriage, and this biblical idea of the man being the head of the household, and what does that mean? And that doesn't sound very equal, Mom, and and all this sort of stuff. And so obviously we had to do what we're talking about right now, which is, okay, what do they really need to hear? What are they really asking about? And what have they seen, right? We're also thinking like, okay, well, this is how we do it. And just trying to express truth within that sort of model, while having a real conversation, asking them questions, and so does leadership mean control? Like, it doesn't have to, all these sort of ideas, right, that they kind of ask questions to get them to think differently about it. But part of it is, I think, and you mentioned this earlier, about part of the agenda behind this sexualization of our culture is this idea that the Christian idea of morality is oppressive in and of itself. All right. Yeah. So this is philosophical, but this is a real this is a real way of thinking in certain segments of our culture, that these ideas of waiting until you get married to have sex, or marriage, or a lot of these ideas are puritanical and therefore oppressive to women and minorities, and they're oppressive to our just the natural way that we should be. And so any resistance, I just want to encourage people, because any resistance is to that progression of let's just sexualize everything. Like, any resistance to that is going to be met with this, oh, well, you're just part of the oppression or something, like you get, oh, you're just a prude, or you just, right. I just want to encourage everybody, like like, don't believe that lie and call it out as a lie. And the way I do it is things like, oh, so we should let kids in, first grade read Mein Kampf and tell them how great Nazism is and let them make their own decision, right? And I'm like, well, no, of course, no. And then they get all like upset. And I'm like, oh no, well, I'm not going to do, like you obviously have a line about some things. I have a line about some things. And here's some evidences about why I have a line about these things. And, because any sort of line is met with this sort of argument, I have some people like that in my family, not my house, but in my family that just can't believe I would stand against some of these things. It's so, and it's like, no, you stand against stuff too with kids,
right?
So let's have a real conversation instead of just demonizing one sort of side of it. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there as if like, we shouldn't feel bad that we have boundaries. And it's actually loving to express these boundaries, because if they are from God and God is love, then we're actually loving people to say, this is what's going to help you. So that's kind of one of my soapboxes.
Well, and kids understand boundaries because that's a big thing now, right? So we talk about having boundaries in relationships. That's part of a healthy relationship, is to have boundaries. And when we talk about, submission and head of household and all that, like, look, God meant it to have mutual respect, right? There's back and forth. There's reciprocity. We should trust each other, and there should be boundaries in relationships. And so, we're not against boundaries in any way, shape, or form, and they aren't either. Because they use that word a lot. And the irony of some of what you're saying, the oppression, is there's so much of that in the sexualized culture that we see. You're talking about not oppressing, and yet look at the games that our kids are playing. Like, there's all kinds of oppression going on there. And the pornography is very violent and objectifying and oppressing. It's like, well, wait a minute, you're against it, but yet here, the other side, if you will, I mean, and I'm not a left-right type of person. I'm not a one side, other side type of person, because it's all very complicated and complex. So there's truth mixed in a lot of places, but everywhere that's coming at you, there's a lot of that. So we're not against, we're not for oppression either. We're also against it. It's not biblical. But in the classroom, we use a lot of research-based statistics and evidence-based approach, because again, we can't use biblical based information, which is fine, but the evidence also says that sex within marriage is more fulfilling. Boom. So it's not just a biblical guideline. It's the way life works. And it can be so satisfying that way. So that's, we tell kids, we want you to have a great sex life someday.
Thank you. Well, and part of that, which some people may not have the ability, in the sense of maybe you're a single parent and whatever, in that sense, you're not in a position maybe to model that sort of healthy man-wife marriage relationship. But, that is part of, I think that's part of the conversation too, which is why when our kids were talking about this, some of the questions we asked were like, well, so, my wife was like, well, I view your dad as the head of the household. And then my daughters are like, but you do so, like, you make decisions, you do so much, so it's like, okay, so we have to show people healthy ideas. And as much as your kids might go, ew, like, they should probably know that you have regular sex, right? They should probably know, especially when they get older, like, hey, your dad and I are, like, we love each other. We are going to be affectionate toward each other. And we're not going to be weird about it, but like, that shouldn't be like a taboo thing. They should see that, because I know for me, again, I'm trying to remember if we talked about this the last time we talked, but I know for me, growing up with media as sort of what you saw as far as marriage, there was this idea in like TV and stuff where it's like, well, you get married and then it's like bunnies for a couple of years and then like you never do it again, sort of thing. And it took a mentor of mine who had been married for 20 years and telling me, oh no, like it's, we do it this often and it's great and it's actually getting better and all this stuff. And you're like, well, that's totally different than what the media has tried to give me about marriage and make jokes about, and they, yada, yada, yada. And they have the jokes about, and that sort of healthy sort of expectation of like, no, this can actually be really, it's not just an obligation where like, okay, God says we got to get married, but we're not going to really enjoy it. Like, like maybe he has our best in mind. And if we give people allow people to, and that's why I think these conversations are important, is because you can sort of have those like, well, what are some healthy examples that you might see of this? Because there are so many statistics. Like, what are some of the statistics maybe that you can bring out with kids in a school to show them like, hey, here are the dangers in some of the stuff that you guys are dealing with?
Oh, yeah. Well, we talk about STDs, I mean, for one thing. We talk about unplanned pregnancies, but then we also talk about just holistically, like it's not just a physical thing. The ramifications aren't just physical. Yes, there's a real danger of getting an STD for sure. And the more partners you have, the better chance that you have at least one STD, if not multiple. But beyond that, there's also emotional ramifications and there's social ramifications, how peers perceive you based on hookups and whether you or not you've sent nudes, et cetera, et cetera. And the emotional is such a thing that we don't talk about, right? Because hookup culture says there's no emotional attachment, which is just a big fat lie. I mean, women are now so proud of themselves that they've emotionally detached from this, and they're becoming, empowered, if you will, to just go ahead and have sex without any attachment. But, when it comes down to it, and at the end of the day, they're also saying, I was wrong. There is emotional ramifications to this. I was devastated. I was heartbroken. All the, and your body doesn't lie either. Your body can't disengage from what's going on. So just helping kids understand all this of the ramifications and things that can happen when you get involved in things that aren't meant to be.
Yeah. I don't know the statistics like off the top of my head, but I do know that it's becoming more and more clear that, young men and men who deal with pornography, which is a lot of them now, that they're less likely to have actual relationships. They're less likely to, be self-motivated and get good jobs. And, there's all of these personality issues that happen because it's doing damage because it's not real. You're dealing in this sort of like unrealistic world, and so it's affecting the real world for you. And so, there's always those statistics about how much more likely you are to get a divorce if you live together first. It's, like the whole idea was like, well, we'll live together and try it out. And if it works, then we'll get married. It's like, no, that actually leads to more divorce. And as do more sexual partners for the different people. Like these sort of statistics show that, hey, without some of these boundaries aren't actually bad. Like they're actually going, if you will sort of give yourself these boundaries, you will have a better life in all these different ways, because sex isn't simply physical. It's mental, it's emotional, it's there's so much to it. And of course, you don't say this in public school, but it's also spiritual. I mean, there's a spiritual element to it
Absolutely.
as well. And so to talk about these things with kids is because this isn't what they're hearing. They're not hearing about the holistic idea of sex, that sex is all about the whole person and two people, and all of the ramifications of that.
Right. And it affects our brain. And so, when you were talking about the way it affects watching porn, affects men. Well, God created us to bond with people, right?
Yes.
And so when we are watching videos, we are actually learning to bond with a screen. And it affects our brain and the grooves in our brain and our neural pathways and all that stuff. And so we now cannot all of a sudden turn to a real life person and bond with them because our brain's not wired that way any longer. And that has a long-term effect, right? Yep. And it will affect the brain, which affects your social, which affects your emotional, which affects relations. I mean, it just
careers, it'll affect
spiritual.
all sorts of things.
Yeah. So,
yeah. And yeah. So, and I just, like I said, when I started out this conversation, I've been really concerned about the acceleration of sexualizing our culture, and I know that there's different sides of it in the sense of, oh, you're just making too much of it, and I don't want to do a fear-based sort of thing either. Mm-hmm. But I do think that to your point and for the book, that we as parents and I think church leaders can be a part of this, that we are on the front lines of this. I guess as I'm kind of closing this out, like this isn't something for a politician to deal with necessarily. Right. It is. I mean, they should do their part or whatever that is. But whatever they do, we're on the front lines of this, so that our kids come home to us, and as parents, or we have relationships with them as aunts and uncles, or leaders, or whatever sort of influence that we have. And so talk about how the book sort of empowers people to kind of be on the front lines of this.
Sure. And for youth leaders too, especially. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I do, like in the first section, is just help leaders and parents and everybody understand the culture, the sexualized culture that our children live in. Like, what are you talking about? Why do I need to discuss this? I mean, it basically answers the question, why? Yeah. Why is this a thing? And why do I need to worry about it? And then the second section is all about habits of healthy relationships. So what are those habits of healthy relationships? And I explore 4 of those. Love, Christ-like love. What does that mean? We say it, but what does that actually look like? Selflessness, mutuality, which was what you were diving into when we were talking about head of household and submission and all that. But that mutual respect, where we were talking about having boundaries and then, trusting and all that stuff. And then communication, how we communicate. But then also the reconciliation and restoration. So, what if this is already an issue? What do we do now? Personal healing and reconciling relationships and moving forward in healthy relationships and maintaining those healthy relationships. But I really want us as parents, because maybe it wasn't modeled for us either. Right. What does a healthy relationship look like? And so I really help parents understand, this is what healthy is. And if you're not healthy in your relationship, then get there, and try and model that, and then have those discussions with the kids so that they understand this is what God intended a healthy relationship to look like. And so how can we move forward in that, and not being afraid of, something's happened. And so now never mind, it's over. We've failed. No, that's not, God has a remedy for that also, right? His son paid that price for us. So how do we
Good.
walk in forgiveness and come out the other side and offer hope to ourselves and hope to our children? Like, look, no matter what happens, there's still time to have that hope, and our story's not over yet. So keep going.
I love it. Yes, I love it. I say it all the time. It's don't treat the middle of the story like the end of the story.
Ooh, I like that.
Because God doesn't. It's not. And I think that's a great kind of place to end a little bit, just because it is such a common issue. It's a common thing, like you're saying. It's if you ask your kids in middle school, do they know? Have they heard about this? Hopefully you're probably not comfortable enough to say, have you done it? Right. Have you heard about doing this? Oh yeah. Right. I mean, they know, it's been happening around them. As sheltered as you might want your kids to be or think they are, they have access to at least the knowledge that it's happening around them. And so that can make us feel like failures. That can make us feel like, oh, use all sorts of religious language. And the devil loves to do that, by the way. The devil loves to give you a lack of hope with religious languch. Like he will use religious language to take away hope. And he'll start bringing up scriptures. Oh, you let the devil get a foothold, didn't you? Oh no, and so you start freaking out. But I think it's a great way to kind of end here, is that wherever you are in this process, there's hope. Absolutely. because we can move forward not in our own strength but in God's strength, and God is capable of all sorts of redemption that we might feel is impossible, right?
Absolutely.
So tell people where they can get the book. So I know you just had a launch party. Where can they get the book?
Well, all the places, Amazon,
all the places,
Barnes and Noble, etc. There's a link on my website though. So just if you start there, hopefulmom.net, and there's a resource page, but there's a page specifically dedicated to the book. So you can read about what it's all about, read some endorsements before you decide. And then there's a button that they can push in order to get to the places where they can order them.
Push the button. So hopefulmom.net is a great place to start. You can kind of see some of the other things that you're doing along with the book, right?
Yes, absolutely. I have a blog post. I have guests on a regular basis. Yeah, we try to have these conversations regularly. And
do you is there a way to get to your social media from the website as well?
Yes, you can. Or you can find me on Facebook at Difficult Conversations for Parents, and at Instagram, difficult.conversations.
Okay, awesome. Well, Barb, this was great. Thank you again.
Thank you. And congratulations on your book too, Brett.
Oh, thank you. Hopefully it's been a blessing for people. So why don't you just pray us out and pray that this conversation will encourage people and give them hope as they deal with these issues within their families and churches.
Father, you're good. And we just give you honor and glory and praise. Father, I thank you for your son. And I thank you for Britt and his obedience to spreading the word about you and your kingdom. Father, we do pray that as parents and caregivers and grandparents and church leaders listen to this message, that they understand who you are. They come to know you more intimately, that they are willing to be bold and courageous and speak the words that you're asking them to speak. Father, we do pray that others will just fall on their knees before your face and allow you to rule over them, that they will lean into you and let you love them the way that you want to love them. We know that love is so deep. So just lean into them, Father. Wrap your arms around them and give them what they need in order to continue following your footsteps. We just give you honor in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.